Chris, friends, Chris LCA, thank you very much for creating these opportunities over the past few weeks. It has started something new. It gives new meaning to virtual. We can share, and knowledge that is not shared is not knowledge. Folks, I will share. It will lean towards Rhino, although this is a wildlife issue. It's a wildlife crime and corruption issue. It will lean towards Kruger, the eye of the storm, the place where in Africa a unique chapter played off in terms of the intensity of poaching and a counter reaction. And it is primarily of the period from about 2013, although 3 years or 4 years prior, this scourge escalated. I will lean law enforcement. And let me be clear then, as the retired general, it's not the solution. This is buying time. It's an intervention of necessity. There is no doubt about the communities, about law enforcement, the judicial system, about the management of the rhino herd, biological management. There's no doubt about demand reduction. That is not at all. That's not what we're going. I have seen people speak to each other over the past few years that would never have spoken. I've seen instances involved that would never have been involved. So tonight, I'm not trying to sell you Steinhoff shares. Really, leaders are merchants of hope. I can do a reality check with you, and I'd like to share, without lecturing you, what has happened the past decade from where I sit, from where St. Park sit, to an extent where the department sit, and how one think one can go ahead with this, because it's not going away. You know, when this started, initially there were different types of people. Some people underestimated it. They said this will go away. Other people said, well, there's no hope anyhow. There's no capacity in government. This will take us over anyhow. Some people became conditioned. You become used to the pain and the slaughter, and then other people stuck with us. And I hope I can end tonight with you sticking to us and getting other people to stick to us. This is the reality check. Black rhino population, remarkably sort of steady. Folks, and let me be clear, I have never once in the past 7 years been under any pressure to cook figures. The integrity of the figures, despite what the mischievous people say, it's true, it's real. These are the figures. You can see the decline in Africa on your left-hand side, and then the decline in South Africa to currently 16,000. Is it 14,499 or 16,001? That's not the point. The point is that we've lost probably close to half of Kruger's population. And that was the epicenter. It remains the epicenter to a great extent. These are the figures that were shared at CITES, and these are the figures that comes from our ministry. Much of what happens here, much of the declining graph has to do with Kruger and the key population in Kruger. Where the perfect storm just erupted, 1,000 kilometers of outer boundary, 350 kilometers at that stage of hostile boundary with Mozambique, that later changed, of course. So here we are. You know, the whole thing that the rhino will go extinct, that will not easily happen. Will we have, in 10 years from now, a growing free roaming population? That is our concern. And we must be very honest about that. That is under threat. We cannot have another decade like the previous decade. The biodiversity, the biological management, all the measures that has brought us here, that at least has a viable population, will not hold another decade. We'll have to do what we do, but do other things as well. This is the graph that sort of kept us sane or kept us objective. You will see that it took 3 years to stop the runaway train. 3 full years of concerted effort, a lot of money, and mostly a human cost. to come to a point where we say, okay, we're declining the number of rhino poachings, up from 3 in Kruger at one stage alone, 3, 4 in South Africa, because of the ever-escalating poacher activity. And it's not difficult to explain. When this sort of money is at play, when there's that sort of demand, what do you expect? And this graph is a simple graph at the time that we put together to understand what is happening to and with us. This graph brought with it severe scrutiny. This was an embarrassment to South Africa. There was political scrutiny, media scrutiny, peer scrutiny. And like I say in the process, unfortunately, many people just gave up and said, well, anyhow, we'll do anything about this. And on a personal level, you know, they brought in the ex-general. And now this guy takes 3 years to sort this out, sort of, kind of. And by the way, it's not sorted out. We could stabilize it and we could achieve success. Victory is way down the road. It's not a cynical statement, but one learned about friends. And I learned a lot from the late Dr. Player. This photo was taken in his house about 2 years before he passed, and in the Midlands of Natal, doing scones and tea, as sharp as a razor, interrogating me, prompting me, complimenting me, and reminding me that in the early 1950s, there were no rhino left in Kruger. And yet, today, we still have a population there. Prince Harry, I'm not dropping names here that he's my personal friend or anything. I can just say that he was a real friend. He still is, but he's not royalty anymore. And subsequently to his 2 visits to Kruger, whenever I got to London, could visit him in Kensington Palace. Now, guys, that is not done. You don't visit the royal family member in London unless you do it 2 years before that time. He was a real friend. And then, Mr. Buffett, one of the biggest grants in the history of conservation, R250 million, just over R250 million, that he contributed because he believed in the cause. There's money for this, by the way. We'll just have to perform and go get the money and then prove that we can do what has got to be done. We've got to also make sure that the other resources, the human resources, and can live with the money. This is not only a monetary thing or a material thing, it's a human thing. Again, a statement that I wouldn't like you to see as a bitter old general sitting there, joined but alone. Our defense force, friends, is conventionally trained. They're not trained to operate in 2-man teams in the bush in the middle of the night in a remote locality. They train to operate in platoons and companies and battalions. That is why we have a defense force. Similarly with our police. And funny enough, and the conservationists will understand this, the language of the bush is tracking. I've seen capable special forces, task force in the bush that are illiterate because you cannot talk the language of the bush. So you were left alone. This is who we are. Anti-poaching operations has become specialized. Not specialized in the word that we make it complex. It's a very specific type of operations that we had to embark on till today, the cooperation of all these forces, but they cannot take the lead. They're not supposed to take the lead. Are we? That is where Africa is now. That is why if we want to safeguard the assets, if we want to safeguard the economic engine, because this is the engine of tourism, we'll have to do, this is happening on our beat. We found common ground, and I mentioned when I started off to say, at least we found common ground amongst conservation industries, with tourism, with other departments, with neighboring countries, to say we don't foresee a 2029 looking like that. And I'm not for the extinction theory or anything like that. It is just that this is serious and it's not going away. And I know it's not only the rhino thing. Think about the poor pangolin. Think about abalone. Think about cycads. And so we can carry on and on, talking into our continent, the last cache of these resources in the world, and talking then worldwide. And the thing is just, if we cannot safeguard this 2-ton beast of prehistoric origin as a South Africa, then what? Think big, start small never was meant to be MBA mumbo jumbo. It was just very taxing at the time, around about 2013, when one started this task. There was no time really to settle down and analyze. It was the third year of the extended and the aggravated onslaught. One had to discipline oneself to realize there's a bigger picture. And we all know the bigger picture says you've got to make sure that ultimately you get to a point where you manage demand and where there's community ownership. Start small, no analysis paralysis. Don't be silly, but if the thing has a chance to work, you implement the thing energetically and dynamically, and then act now. A park with 1,000-kilometer outer boundary, 12 groups in the park at any time, extremely taxing and requiring self-discipline to do that while you work through the layers and the various facets of wildlife crime and corruption combating, anti-poaching, and answer to your political leadership and your line leadership. This has very much become the philosophy at the time, and it lasted 3-4 years. Few things divide us these days as we have common ground on rhino. There's, of course, the matter of legal trade that I wouldn't at all like to talk about. Hunting or not hunting. And then green militarization, this nice loaded term that fits so well into our legacy and history and a neighboring Mozambique. And yes, it's up for scrutiny. We welcome the academics that work on this because, like I've said, we're rather involved in the various layers of this campaign, and one appreciates all the inputs. Many of the students and the academia and other never offered any solution or alternative. The same people that says the Rangers are heroes, the same people that say it's the thin green line, will question green militarization. It's paramilitary. And let's remind ourselves, it was a very bold, if not courageous step from the Sandpark leadership at the time to go the paramilitary way. Otherwise, it would have been to the detriment of the Rangers. We had to teach them some military techniques, equip them accordingly to face the threat of armed bandits continuously, consistently plundering our resources. This is not an adventure. This is not a retired general or somebody or some NGO who thought this out. It was an intervention of necessity and still is today. Talking about Rangers, friends, we often talk about the cost of this campaign. It's exorbitant, and I'm not sure how we will sustain it, but these are the risks that you face, sending Rangers into counter-poaching operations. The Ranger down, Ranger convicted. Then a Ranger deranged. There's a real threat that a Ranger can get psychologically injured in this process, and that his family are injured because of the prolonged stress and what goes with it. A Ranger alienated. You may be our hero, you may be many people's hero, but back in Umkhuhlu on a Saturday morning in the spa, you're not necessarily a hero anymore, and your family are not welcome in the community anymore, not because you've done anything to them, because you did your work. And then, sadly, a Ranger betrayed, where Rhino money buys Rangers, and a Ranger has got to live seeing comrades, friends, colleagues being bought with Rhino money and become part of the corruption cycle. Chris, is the sound all right now? Okay, should be good. Wellness projects, and central to this project is the South African National Parks Honorary Rangers. We started working, we had to address the spiritual welfare, the physical welfare. How do they live? What does a remuneration package look like? What equipment do we give them? The psychological welfare, the social welfare, the deprivation. Central in these projects, you'll see Project Embrace, which is today a primary project of the South African National Parks Honorary Rangers. This is a very favorite picture of mine. So when I talk canine, I take this picture, and I'll not mention the name of the ranger is Kyla, responsible for about 70 arrests, and a photo taken in the back of the helicopter after a successful mission on a Saturday. I cannot overemphasize the importance of canines in counter-poaching operations. They're a real force multiplier. They make the proverbial difference. And of late, the latest type of canines, the hounds that we sent out in packs to follow the spoor. And I said, Chris, that this is a photo of a ranger on a Saturday afternoon in the back of the helicopter flying back from a successful operation. The much spoken about technology. And it's expensive and it's sexy and the donors only want to give money for this, which is true. Technology makes things possible. Only people can make it happen. I firmly believe that some of the hows and the wows in Africa will come from technology. I'm not putting it up against the rangers. There's no substitute. But you owe it to the rangers to aid and help them with technology. To have early warning, to have detection and tracking, so that you deploy your rangers as intelligently as possible. We have failed in Kruger with about 1/3 of the technology projects. And one of our main donors said to me, face to face, you will fail. Let's find out what works. If you fail, fail fast. We know now what works and we can share it with everybody. And it's not weapons of mass destruction or something. It is surveillance, early warning, detection and tracking. And we've been ably assisted by the CSIR over the past number of years to get to where we deployed this mobile integrated radar system that is very unique in the world, and it is one of the most successful items on our inventory. A photo of the operations room at Sikakusa. Not everybody can look like this. If you have a dedicated individual with a smartphone and a bakkie, that's an operations room. But you've got to have a place that is your nerve center, where you bring together. Otherwise, how will you bring 7, 8 state departments, NDOs, industry, air wing, canines, special rangers together? This was just the operations room in Sikakusa. Then another thing that maybe drive us apart, and that has also become here and there a non-value adding argument instead of a scientific discussion. We all understand the threat. This is the threat. I almost never show any slides of dead rhino. I'm around for the rhino alive, and many rhinos have died on my beat, but we have saved many rhinos. Likewise, we're aware of what happened around us. Our rangers live there. They come from there. Those are our neighbors. And it is not adding value to put the thin green line between those two. Nobody has ever said that I know of. This is mutually exclusive. It is just a reality check to say you've got to act now, mindful of your community. And one hope that going forward, we will still fiercely debate this, talk about this without necessarily polarizing it. Like I say, that's not productive. I'll say something shortly about alliances, the coalition of the willing. It is so important that we take hands. And I'm not saying this loosely or when we feel like it or we have a conference together. Your police and your prosecuting authority, your private rhino owners, all the NGOs. Right in the middle there, you see our department with the Green Scorpion. You see a prominent NGO like the Honor Parks Honorary Rangers. You see the various provinces. We'll have to find ways, streamlined ways. You know, there's a difference between an ally and a partner. You've got to go into partnership and make sure that you utilize your resources well, ultimately, to get to a better outcome. Within the last quarter, we realized in Kruger at the time that you cannot save the whole world. You've got to make sure that you apply pressure, resources, management attention, focus accordingly. On the left, you'll see that was at that time the distribution of rhino population in Kruger. And naturally, we focused on the south very much with technology. And please note that even at that time, the zone is not the park. The zone does not stop at the park boundary. it does not even stop at the international boundary. And so we included with time the middle slide, the joint protection zone, the private reserves to the west of Kruger, today still in a firm alliance, and also in alliance with the concessions on the Mozambique side. And then a unique part up north with an agreement with our sister partner, Limpopo National Park, where within 2 years we could stabilize rhino poaching from about 70 a year to single digits last year. Just more about the alliances. We used to just jump across the border to get to somebody on the Mozambique side. That's a day's drive. If you get to the boundary, we jump either way, and we work together, and we could make sure that we get that cooperation, looking each other in the eye, and make ourselves count. Just a slide. This was taken at the Ranger Conference 2 or 3 years ago at the Wildlife College. Why don't we go more Pan-African? Do we want a illustrious head office in Gabs or in Nairobi or in Pretoria? We don't need that. We need a few people. We need to be connected. We can do a lot better for the region. And I'm not saying that as a theoretical statement. I'm propagating it. What we are doing now, going ahead, and I'll soon close with this, that zone experience, that alliance experience, that sharing lessons learned, we're now applying under a national project, Project Southern Cross, in South Africa. It's mandated and managed from the department, where we have various zones. Note the key. Some are functional, fully functional, some are initiated, and some is work in progress. There are rhino populations in every province. We as a department, together with Sandparks and KZN, cannot save the whole world, but you've got to get to a point where you take focused action. So we demarcated zones around key populations. Key population, not always the largest population. Of course, the greater Kruger one is working well. Not perfect, but it's working well. In the Waterberg, there's a very useful alliance and partnership with the private sector, provincial parks, and national parks. That is how we prefer a zone, all 3 layers of those parks. And let it be noted also that more than half of the rhinos in South Africa are in private hands and are protected by private industry. The Zululand zone functioning very well. The frontier zone, there between East London and Port Elizabeth to Graafrenet. The Garden Route zone, private owners only, between roughly Mossel Bay up to Knysna. The Kalahari zone, and then the Platinum zone, still work in progress. And this is not an elaborate scheme. If we do what I show you here, we cover 70 to 80% of the rhino of South Africa, and it's wildlife. Of course, all the wildlife will benefit, and it's a zone. Everybody in the zone, whether it's a municipality or a mine or a community, will benefit from what we have built up the past 3 years to where we are now. That is just a map to show how manageable this is, to show how realistic this is. Waterberg, GCAP, Zululand, Frontier, Garden Route. The Kalahari zone is not accurately demarcated there. And then the northwest we have not done because we cannot decide whether the Hume farm must be part of the zone or a separate zone. If we do our job right and not ignore the rest of the province, focus resources here, that is what we plan to go forward with. What will we do there? We know the routes. We know the route of horn. We know the route of weapons and the route of poachers. We established in the department the EFC, Environmental Enforcement Fusion Center. I'm back to that operations room in Skakusa. That's not good enough. You need it on national level. We've achieved a moderate win. Friends, and we must be realistic about this. This was hard earned. Mischievous people say, you lose less rhino because there are less rhino. That's a fact. But that is not the only factor. By far. We've got to get to a strong win where we help other agencies to collapse networks. It's no use now say it's the police and it's organized crime and it's some other department. That's not the point. Of course, a total win is one day where there's no demand, and all one is aiming at in the long term is to have a manageable demand. We'll take this And we support, as a department, with human intelligence, technology intelligence, to get the evidence so that the other agencies can take action and arrest and collapse the networks. And doing so ourselves through the Green Scorpions. And this is not rocket science. It's not something that you'll find in the literature. It makes common sense. While we act now, we've got to start small. We have to collapse the networks. My last slide, Chris. You know, when you do a bit of road running and marathons, as you run, they have a cut-off time. And the water points, they pack them up. You must please not do that to us. We've come a long way. In 2013, this nation said, do hot pursuit. And some of them were very disappointed that the ex-general don't do hot pursuit and go kill the poacher somewhere in a neighboring country. There were calls for shoot to kill, and people wanted a Berlin Wall. They said, fence them out. Please don't wrap up and pack up the water points. We're on our way. It can be done. We are not claiming a victory of any sort. We're claiming success, and we know where to dig in our heels, and there's a clear way forward towards combating wildlife crime and corruption, and specific rhino poaching.
Hello, thank you for the talk. I just wanted to know, what kind of subjects would you need to do to actually, because I want to get into stuff like General's doing. What kind of school subjects should we do?
Look, if I can jump in before General Jooste, the first thing you've got to become 67 years old. But on the other side, wonderful that you have such aspirations. Either General Jooste or anybody else who are very familiar with this, please, General Jooste, or anybody else who wants to come in, just raise your hand.
I can come in, Chris?
Please.
In no specific subjects. We don't need super people. We need super attitude. And it starts with the basics. If your heart is in this, you take your normal matric and you report to our National Academy, South African Wildlife College, you do selection and you do training, which is very physical, very direct. And from there on you work. From there on you go to a University of Technology. From there on you do certain courses. There is a real learning and a career path. And my friend from the Wildlife College, who is as well as who's on the call tonight, can maybe just respond on how we are designating the anti-poaching ranger now as a specific occupational group with a career path and a learning path. And I dare say, young man, more and more people who wants adventure and who loves the bush do this because it's real. It's not just something that you do as a pastime, and there is a career in it as you progress through the ranks.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. I see there's Oliver Hutton, another young guy. Oliver, so happy to have you on. We're listening to your question, please.
Thank you very much. When you showed the statistics, about how long did it take you to get those statistics, and how did you do it?
Chris, can I come in?
Yes, please. Yes, you are live. You can come in.
The question I understand is, when we started this, how long did it take?
The statistics, General, the statistics. Oh, okay. When you gathered your statistics on, how did you get those statistics?
The statistics are very important. It can become so academic, but that's not the point. You've got to understand where you are, otherwise you drown in information. And we were fortunate to have the Council for Scientific and Industrial Research, the CSIR, with clever people who developed a platform called Seymour, where if you feed that right, you will get your information back in a format that will allow you to plan because you see trends and tendencies, that allows for some predictive modeling, and that will make sure that you have a true record of what has happened. And that is the beauty about today. And that means that a smartphone has become a tool of the trade for a ranger because he just enters it there with icons into the system. That took us a good 1 or 2 years to do that, and that is why today we know where we stand. Otherwise, you won't know. It's so involved, it's so busy, it's so intense, and that is how we got a grip on it with simple mathematics, statistics, and metrics, but aided well with a good program and a platform.
Thank you, General. Anybody else? I'm looking for hands here. Rod?
Marty Jasper.
Please unmute. Marty, and then Dave Peppler. I see his hand. Let's start with Marty and then Dave Peppler.
So thanks again very much for the talk. It was very interesting. Just on a slightly different tack from a poaching point of view, in terms of the pangolins and the link to, possibly link to COVID, there's been quite a few different theories in that. Is it not a very good opportunity to be putting even more pressure on those countries that are consuming pangolin and wet markets and wildlife trade and meat and all of that to try and convince them that what's going on is wrong?
I go, Chris?
Yeah, you can go. You're live all the time.
This sort of initiative is very much resides on ministerial level and on bilaterals between countries, diplomatic and political. And I know that sounds fuzzy, and I know often we are irritated with the grip and grin and the meet and greet, and we sign and it's red carpets. You've got to go that way, and yes, this offers an opportunity. And let me also then add that we've had inquiries from around the world the past 2 months. It's been the best 2 months in a decade. And we know it won't last, but we'll take it. But that shows you one thing. Do control of access and movement in your parks. The deep-seated corruption and the deep-seated criminal networks infiltrate that, and that is when you have escalating poaching. But back to the possible causes of where we are, I really believe that even in China, and I don't know whether Phil Harting would like to come in here, it resonates and offers opportunity.
Can I just come in there a little bit? Marty, I'm involved with pangolins, as most people will know. This is about demand reduction. It's not about, so this goes to the core of it. And the positive outcomes of COVID with pangolins have come in an awareness that bushmeat is a problem. Even in China, people are aware that. And that is spreading throughout Africa. And even in Gabon now, they've banned pangolins from the bushmeat markets. So there's a positive aspect of that. But it's about demand reduction. This has got nothing to do with actually fighting the poachers on the ground, because they don't have that. So, but it's a big win on the demand reduction side, which is the most important part of anti-poaching. Sorry,
are we seeing sort of positive results? I know it's kind of 3 months down, but as you say, the certain countries have banned in those meat markets. Are we seeing some sort of positive outcomes already?
Yes, we are. It's certainly, I mean, Gabon has legislated it already. So that's pretty positive already in Africa.
Because, I mean, as they say, today it's a pangolin, the next day it may be a bat, the next day it may be another animal. So to try and actually prevent all wildlife trade in wet markets and all this sort of thing, in my understanding, is the right thing to try and emphasize. Are we getting that message out here?
We're doing our best, but we're having another talk on pangolins in a month or two's time for Sangha Pangolin project. So listen in and we'll bring that up.
Thank you.
We'll prep them for it.
Thank you, Rod. I just want to say that Dave Peppler is next, and then after Dave, we have Janssen Davies, then Ashwell Gleason, and then Campbell Scott. Okay, so let's get Dave, please. Dave, I'm just checking. I saw you just now. There you are. You're unmuted, Dave. Thank you.
Thank you, General Jooste. If Elon Musk has his way, we will have swarms of satellites covering the entire globe in real time at all times. Are you thinking ahead, or with using this new technology, which is going to burst like a hand grenade over the world? It's really going to be spectacular in terms of autonomous drones that could, I'd like to see a bull terrier drone simply tackling anybody coming within 500 meters of a rhino, but I mean, that's a pipe dream. Are you thinking ahead of using this new technology?
General, just before you answer, Samantha, we've noticed your hand. Thank you, General.
Chris, absolutely. First of all, connectivity. In many parks, in Kruger, you don't have connectivity. By design, we don't have connectivity. Satellites, currently VSAT and all of that is not affordable. We will come to a point where we have unlimited flow of information, and it will be affordable. And unlimited observation and patterns. So Dave, absolutely. We have a philosophy within that says big park, big view. When you try and protect an area like Kruger, you've got to get up there. Why would you not do that? And then have the necessary surveillance, early warning, detection, tracking, and that is enabled with superior connectivity. No doubt about that. And I believe in Africa, if we make that affordable, it can have a profound impact.
Thank you very much. I think the next person here is Janssen Davies, please.
Thank you, Johan. If I may ask you now, as you reflect and you sit there with that 10-year-old bottle of red wine and you think about the last 10 years, what is the biggest breakthrough, positively, and or surprise? And what is the biggest negative? What's the biggest lesson that you would have learned looking at everything that you've experienced? Thank you.
Thank you, Janssen, from the Honorary Rangers, and as a personal friend also. I've learned that you've got to build a capability. A capability is not a single person. It's not a single piece of equipment. It is not one SOP. It is not one instance. A capability stands on legs, and as many legs it is necessary to ensure that you get the best impact, so that the proverbial sum of the various parts is bigger than the pure sum of it. I've learned that, and I know I'm overstating the obvious. We have to stop the Band-Aid. You've got to act now. There's no doubt about it. But make sure that every step you take, you discipline yourself despite the pressure to make sure that what you put in place fits in, and that it is sustainable, and that it has a workable systems approach that is simple enough. One is disappointed South Africa could have gone further. And now one is sensitive that one doesn't make a political statement, because other State Departments has other priorities. If we could muster and focus all the relevant State Departments, not necessarily only in a whole of government approach, in a whole of society approach, we could have been a lot further. And by the way, that's the only way that we'll get further, whether Foreign Affairs does the international agreements, whether the police arrest and the Hawks investigate, and the prosecuting authority prosecutes, and the NGOs help. One is disappointed that we haven't gone far enough down that road.
Thank you. Ashwell Glasson, please. You're unmuted, Ashwell.
Thank you. Great. I know some of you, many of you, others I don't. Great to chat, General. We were supposed to have a ring this week. I was going to give you a shout tomorrow, but then I saw this invite. Just to pick up on the thread for the youth, I think Oliver and the other young chap, there really is a massive investment going into building careers for rangers. and through not necessarily the traditional routes of going to a University of Technology and doing a diploma in nature conservation, there are other ways into contributing and adding value. Also the people issue side, and then of course the challenge of anti-poaching. So we do know, and we've just completed a brand new curriculum framework for field rangers and anti-poaching rangers, of which Max is also on this call, and Alton and a few other people have helped design and submit. So to the young people listening, you've got many routes in, and taking an optimistic line from the General, explore those routes, because we need all the boots on the ground that we can get as well. And I'm not just talking in terms of the Wildlife College, I'm talking actually pretty much Africa. The demand for the skills and skilled rangers is massive, really is massive. And there are opportunities out there. Yeah, thanks, Chris. I think that I just
Thank you, Ashwell, from the Wildlife College of Southern Africa. General, would you like to add, or shall we move on?
Well, Chris, there's a proliferation of training institutions throughout the country. The industry is alive. And we just feel that the Wildlife College is the center of excellence. It's not only they that can do the training, but the infrastructure, the research, the experience, and the expertise lies there, so that we make sure as we grow the industry, it's a reputable industry. With due respect, we don't want cowboys. We don't want people get out of buckies and it's 10 sorts of camo uniform and 4 or 5 magnums. We need responsible law enforcement officials protecting our natural assets. And we believe the core of that, the basis of that lies in the Wildlife College.
Thank you for that, General. Before you unmute, Rod, unmute Scott Campbell next. I just want to mention that I've noticed Joshua Langer, and whoever is next to Joshua. Good to see you youngsters on. Lovely that you are joining us. Keep on following. We're going to bring more and more and more for the youngsters. And soon the Wildlife College of Southern Africa will have too many youngsters there. But lovely joining us. Campbell Scott, please, listening to you.
Yeah, thanks very much, General. That's, yeah, I must say it's encouraging to know we have caliber of people like yourselves at the helm. My question is around technology, and you know, at one stage we were trying to access, I think it was Israeli radar system, foliage penetrating radar that could identify people. But my question really lies is that, do you have access to this, and how much is politics playing a role? I mean, I've heard rumors about, you know, we'll give you this technology. I mean, talking from a government perspective, you know, but this is what we want in return for it. But, you know, do you have access, and do we have the right access to the technology that you want? Or are there all the red tape and bridges that we need to cross?
We have access to technology locally, first of all, and with the CSIR. Internationally, it is governed by the National Conventional Arms Control Committee. And if it's American, it's the what we call ITA, the International Trade in Arms Regime. So yes, you don't have free access, and when you import that or even start studying it, you've got to have permission. There are bureaucratic loops to go through, I suppose, with good reason. What I can also tell you that Campbell, that the radar that you mentioned is a dead set. There are two things that work in the bush: is the radar and magnetic. Other things as well. You have thermals, you have other means of observation, and specifically at night, the radar and then magnetic. The only thing that calls a false alarm on magnetic is an animal that is snared. So we've walked a long way there, and fortunately the CSIR has access to the best in the world. So when we developed our radar system, which is a locally manufactured radar in Reutech Radar Systems in Stellenbosch, I think we got the best of it. But there are technologies, and even technologies that we deployed in Kruger, that was only available offshore, wide offshore, and yes, and in Israel.
So just a quick question on the magnetic. Can you just elaborate? What's that? I'm not aware of. What is that?
Without now lecturing, when you put out a sensor, you can put it subsurface, soil mounted, on the surface, on a tree, on a what. The magnetic is sensitive. If you throw a panga over it, I'll see it on my laptop or my smartphone.
Yeah, or foot,
and it's often soil mounted, and then of course you have seismic that works on vibration.
Yeah, okay.
And then radar, and you mentioned foil penetrating radar, which is where we have to go there some other time.
Well, it just seems to be great, especially with multiple terrains. This is the thing, is that, you can flood an area and it's an early warning detection system. So, well, that's good to hear, because, the technology, there just seems to be some very nice technology out there, but everyone talks about cameras, which worries me, because, radar, I also agree, I think, well, certainly from my limited knowledge, is where is what excites me about the technology.
We mustn't be seduced by technology, but we have got to be tech savvy. If we want to take this next level, we can deploy 10 times as many rangers as we have, which is, by the way, as expensive. We have accurate calculations to prove that. Take nothing away. You cannot do anything without the ranger. Ultimately, you've got to react to a signal. But we must really explore technology options.
Thank you.
Thank you, General. I'm moving on. Samantha, I think your surname is Sitole. I can't see the full surname. I've unmuted you, please, Samantha, and welcome. Good to have you on.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the talk. My question is about the community. I was wondering, with the statistics around success and the ranger initiatives, is there any of that success attributed to community engagement or any community activity that you might be engaged in the neighboring communities that have led to the reduction in poaching?
Absolutely. Chris, can I go?
Please do.
Samantha, absolutely. There is a clear correlation where you have the goodwill and support of your community. And by that, I not mean pumping them, that you only like them when they give you information. It's difficult for them. It's extremely complex. If we could develop clouds around our parks, and not an IT cloud, a cloud of community goodwill and ownership, and real ownership, like in material ownership, we will change this. It's one of this, apart from demand management, it's one of the strategic options. And we must never alienate our communities. There's a direct correlation between successful counter poaching and prevention and community relations.
Thank you for that, General. I also appreciate very much that you earlier pointed out it's not either or. It's all hands on deck, every bit, whether it's the communities, whether it's the anti-poaching, it's just not either or. But Samantha, we will stay in contact. I hope we've got your email address. We'd also like to know what you are studying and doing, so we can also involve you in the youth programs. Thank you very much, Samantha, for joining. The next person that I have on my list is Annette. I think you would pronounce it Oopsley. I'm not sure, Annette, if you can give me your correct surname and then you can ask your question. If you will just unmute her, please.
Oh, she needs to, yeah.
Okay.
Just unmute, please. There you go. Thank you, Annette.
Okay, hi. So my surname is Hübschler. Thanks very much for the talk, General. I'm going to be slightly provocative. I found the title to your presentation quite interesting. It was the first decade of the... And I know that you've largely sort of walked away from talking about the war on poaching. So my question to you is, what do we actually have to look forward to for the second decade? I was kind of missing a bit of a prognosis and the way forward for the second decade of dealing with the rhino poaching issue. So I'm very careful not to use the war terminology, but I'd like to know what are the lessons learned and how are we going to engage in the future? Good, thank you.
Thank you, Chris. Can I go?
Please.
Of course, Dr. Annette has done extensive research around Kruger in South Africa and in Mozambique. and the academic results of that has served us well. And like she says correctly, it's intruding in a meaningful way and provocative enough. I think, Annette, that it's clearing the park from the outside. We said that 6-7 years ago, and yet the compelling facts, the urgencies inside the park just bog this down. And when I talk outside, it's like the peels of an onion, starting in the consumer countries, working through the international networks, then you come into your continent, then you come into your country, then into neighboring countries, then into communities. And for both, or for all those layers, there are good people and bad people. So you've got to combat the bad people and get the other ones on board. And that is our realization. To become sustainable, to get to be successful and long-term successful, it's to clear the park from the outside without being over ambitious about it. And thank you for pointing out the so-called war. I, by the way, realized that coining that phrase, which later was adopted by the late minister, yes, it was probably, it had advantages and disadvantages, maybe more disadvantages. Advantages in that, yes, it touched a nerve. Disadvantages, it led to the stereotyping, it led to this perception, here are these aggro people, they only want war, and I'm fully cognizant of that. And one should avoid it, and we later changed it to the Rhino campaign, and that is what it should be, because the law enforcement part is only part of it.
General, I'm sorry to interrupt. Your last two sentences, when you just qualified why you sort of moved away from the term war, on my side dropped. I don't know if it was on everybody else's side. I would like you just to repeat that, please.
Thank you, Chris. I consciously called it a war, like somebody would call it a war on drugs. I at that time went on record to say, how can armed bandits plunder my resources repeatedly, consistently? How must we combat that? I then admitted that there were advantages and disadvantages, probably more disadvantages, because that led to the stereotyping. That led to a dissonance. It was too confrontational, and in the bigger scheme of things, one should avoid that. You listen what is happening in the US now, and the police force will tell you de-escalate. That does not mean that when you enforce the law, you do it half-heartedly. But the leadership should be mindful of phrases like that, I admit.
Thank you very much. Lesson learned. Also good to mention that a lot of mistakes were also made through the years, and we have to learn from that.
Absolutely.
I have it that there's an Adam Parker. I can't see Adam. Rod,
Adam Parker, asked him to unmute you. Adam Parker, you need to unmute yourself.
Hi, can you hear me?
Clearly.
No, you perfectly. Go ahead.
Perfect. Thanks very much for the talks. We're loving them. Just wanted to ask General Jooste, we've had good success with organized dehorning of rhinos within the private parks in KwaZulu-Natal. And what are the requirements or challenges to dehorning rhinos in the private parks surrounding the Kruger National Park or within sand parks and Izimvelo, and why are they not following that path as well?
A couple of years ago, when we did the strategic options, one approach was, when we did the strategic planning, to look at the asset. Now, your first challenge is to make the live asset more valuable than the dead asset. So you look at the horn. The horn you can infuse with thought. Later learned you cannot. You can color. You cannot. You can put a sensor in it. You can sell the horn, and you can dehorn. There are more that I cannot remember now. So we extensively looked at that. And of course, when you have a manageable population in a rather demarcated area, it is an option to just deflect the threat, knowing that they might kill for that little stump, and knowing that you have to have the money. It's about 15,000 per incident to do that every 3 or 4 years. It is definitely an option, and it was only in Kruger at the time, giving the ground surface, giving the number of rhino, it was almost impossible to do it. Definitely an option, and we
thank you very
must
much.
not always think only about the poacher. We must think about our asset and about other factors, other than only project and think what will we do with the poacher. There are other options.
Thank you, General. Another one of our young viewers, Luke Bridle. We're going to unmute you, Luke, and please just unmute yourself. There you go, Luke, your question.
Just to ask again, for the Wildlife College, what you call it, with the, do they give you bursaries and that, and how high do you need to be, like, academically and that?
Ashwell, I'm unmuting you. Thank you.
Yes.
Sorry, Ashwell, just unmute again.
Luke, you need just essentially a matric certificate. It's more about what the general is talking about. It's motivation. So for field rangers and getting it on the ground and working yourself up, it's about teamwork, leadership, motivation, passion for conservation. I mean, the reason why you want to do it. Physical fitness comes into it. Everything that a young man should possess and can drive. So it's a mixed skill set as well. Obviously focuses on wildlife law enforcement, the community components, and your ability to work in a team. Because conservation, and I'll say it right now, it's actually a people-driven thing. We lead people to make differences for wildlife. So yeah, and the courses are as short as 6 weeks, and there are bursaries available periodically. But the sooner you apply and get in, the more likely you can be able to pick up a bursary. So yeah, perhaps I can share. Yeah.
So when would be good for applying? Like, when do you mean that? Like straight after matric or earlier than that? How?
So I think what you should do is probably somehow we'll get our details to each other. Rather start earlier, and then I can get you into discussions with the various people who run the programs at the college. And earlier is better, because if there's, post-COVID, and sorry, Chris, I don't want to take up too much time, but as COVID-19 starts to roll down, physical training will become a greater and greater reality. So yeah, let's talk. Chris, if I can request you share our email addresses with each other, and then I can help out.
Thank you, Ashwell. Maret, take note, please. We will do that. Thanks to Maret. Thank
Luke,
you.
just stick your email on the chat below, and we'll pick it up. Okay. The chat box below.
I have his email. I have his email address.
Okay, thanks, Marit.
Thank you, Maret. Okay, I just want to check, ladies and gentlemen, we're still 87 people on, and it seems to me there's still a lively debate. I just want to double check here for any further questions. If not, Maret, come in. Are there anybody else that you notice?
Sabila Rietmüller.
Sabile Rietmüller. Where's Sabile? From Germany.
Okay, General. Sorry. Yeah. Wow, I was deeply impressed by what you said. And two things. One, I mean, a few weeks ago, we saw a fantastic presentation of the Black Mambas, lady rangers, women rangers. And this made a very strong impression on me, how much importance that has for the communities around the park to win over the local people. Now, the question is, did these Black Mamba or similar groups of women rangers play any role in your campaign? And if not, why not? And second, I saw a very impressive presentation recently of the American NGO Wild Aid, who very much focus on the demand side of wild animal trafficking in China, in those countries where the demand is. And I've seen some of their videos, and they work with celebrities and very strong messages. Have they been helping you in some way, or not yet? Or can they play a role now to really work even harder on the demand side? These are my two questions.
Thank you, Sabeel Rietmiller. If you'd want to check on the internet, Tumbe Island in Zanzibar, then you know what the life work of Sabeel Rietmiller contains. Thank you. I'm putting you on mute, Sabeel. General, please. Thank you.
Sabeel, thank you very much for the question. First, on the demand side, I don't specifically know this potential partner. Like I mentioned right at the beginning, the only strategic option is to manage demand, to make demand manageable. About the Black Mambas, fully aware of them. They are what we call community scouts. You know, the term ranger these days can mean that you have a trails ranger that take guys on walks, there are rangers that does normal conservation, and then we have what I spoke tonight about, primarily the anti-poaching rangers. The Black Mambas is not in that category. They're community scouts. And back to our reference to communities, yes, they play a role. They're doing superb work in the communities without now being paternalistic or chauvinistic. The female acumen, instinct approach helps. It just helps a lot to get through to people and to form opinion, to educate, to reach out. We will need more of that. The community rangers is something that is too fragmented and that is missing in the Black Mambas, I think, has almost perfected the community scout or the community ranger facet of this campaign.
Sabeel, just show me a thumbs up if you've heard that. Thank you. All right, because the sound went a little bit down. I have the next person, looks like Wiggy Ellenberger, please, if you can unmute.
Am I there? Hello, thanks, Chris. I'm another Sandparks Honorary Ranger. General, I'd just like to know the position that you have with the private rhino owners. You mentioned earlier that John Hume, you still hadn't sorted things out there and included him. What's the actual position that you have with the private owners? Thank you.
Thank you, Wiggy.
I think for once in this country, we're looking at a national herd. And that national herd, more than 50% of it is in private hands. And the private sector has an impressive record of protecting that rhino. And the state apparatus, the State Department cannot necessarily directly involve themselves and go protect those rhino. We can mobilize resources and we can make sure that whatever we do, support the private sector. Right now, the only formal body that one can work through is the Private Rhino Owners Association. And we are in consultation with them, and they are part of the fora in the department, like Wildlife Ranching South Africa is. The private sector is foremost in the program, Project Southern Cross, to consolidate the wildlife zones in South Africa. Key to future success.
Thank you very much. Oliver, you get your last question. I'm unmuting you. Oliver Atten. There you go, Oliver.
I don't have a question.
Oh, sorry, I saw your hand. Sorry, Oliver. But thank you, and again, lovely to have you on tonight. I'm putting you back on mute. Thank you. All right, just want to check the team. Do we see any more hands? No more hands?
Don't see any more hands. Anybody need any more hands? Yes, Marty Jasper again. Marty.
Okay, Marty, please.
Yeah, I'm unmuted. So the one question again, it sort of goes around the stockpile of rhino horn, of dehorned rhinos and whatever that is in the state. At the moment, it costs a lot of money to protect that and also to actually protect rhinos for those private rhino owners. What are the options with that rhino horn long term? I'm not, don't get me wrong, I'm not trying to advocate trade, but I'm trying to understand, is there a way that we can do something with that asset, or do we literally need to burn it? I mean, what do we do?
Okay, General Jooste, I'm glad you've got to respond to this one.
Shall we call it a loaded question?
Sorry.
being a quasi-civil servant, there is no doubt, if you do the calculations, why don't we use that money? All that we talk about tonight and sustainability and the cost, it's there. We have it, tons and tons of it. But I think the fact that it's not burnt must be some indication that there's a realization of the value. And please let's not presuppose and don't tag me on anything here or tweet on me on this. It is not being destroyed, and the future will have to learn it's a political decision. Through, and whether we agree with CITES or whether people are strong or one political party is stronger than the other, it'll play out in the political leadership environment. And us lot can only make sure that we advise well and that we make sure that we remain sober about it. But doing the calculations, there can be no doubt that there's an easy answer to the question.
Do we have an estimate value of the stockpiles of rhino horn in rands or dollars or?
Yes. Yes.
Okay, so you're going to keep us at suspense, or you're going to give us a number?
No, definitely not.
Thank you. I know that's a loaded question, General Jooste.
Campbell Scott.
Yeah, thank you. Just one other question. I have lots of questions, but I'm trying to be generous. But can you give us an indication of elephant poaching, poisoning? I mean, obviously very concerned about vultures. How much of that is an impact in the Kruger now or the Greater Kruger National Park area? And how has it escalated over time? So what are we seeing now? What are the trends? What are the concerns going forward? Because obviously, I mean, these poisoning incidences are, extremely concerning.
On elephant poaching, Krishna, and I think it's a very salient issue. In 2016-17, we peaked at 70 elephant poached, about 50% from Mozambique and 50% from our side. We got it down to last year a low double digit of some 10 or 11 or 12, and this year it's going single digit. And the primary reason is the cooperation with the Limpopo National Park. And the work done on the other side, and specifically the involvement of the Peace Park Foundation and the Transfrontier Conservation Area, that works. It was signed in 2002. We rediscovered it now. It's working for us. The poisoning, and I think Petron is still on a meeting. Petron knows the ins and outs of the protocols and the SOPs and the planning and the preventative measures. It remains a scary prospect, and there has been incidents of that. Not many, but enough to have a significant impact. And like you say, it's 2 or 3 elephant, but 40 vultures and other creatures. If ever there was a strategic issue, this is it, but it's getting due attention. And it's getting due attention bilaterally or trilaterally between us, Mozambique and Zim, and with a lot of support from those countries and then from the Peace Park Foundation.
Thank you,
Peter Ron, if you're still there, if you want to comment, you just have to unmute yourself.
Yes. Thanks, Rod. I mean, I won't take a lot of time. So the poaching issue is really a serious issue, and it's something that's very prominent and escalating in the region. And actually, Dr. Annette Herbstler-Finch, who's still in the call, I think, she did a baseline study for us on the whole poisoning issue in the Great Limpopo TFCA. So we actually, which was completed recently, and we actually had a discussion earlier this week around it. Monday, and it's something that's actually even more threatening than most things we know, because it's got a range of impacts. You know, not only wildlife, but also it's a serious human safety issue. So it's something that we're working on, and something that we really need to escalate to a high level, and definitely increase the awareness around it. So I mean, if anyone's interested in finding out more about it, you're welcome to contact me. I'll put my email address on the chat group. I think Chris got it as well. But yeah, now I couldn't agree more with Johan. So it's something that we're working on, but it's by no means something that's clear in terms from a way forward.
Thank you, Petron. Good to see you again. Thanks for joining us. And yes, we can pass forward your email address. I just want to remind about two things. I think there's going to be a last question now, but before we allow for the last question, just wanted to say that the last question is the question that's going to come from our young Oliver Hutton, but not now yet. When I'm done, Oliver, then you, the future, you are the future. You get the chance to ask the last question. There's Petron's email addresses on. Just want to mention that there is a talk on our website by Colin Bell, that is on the trade side of things. Then I also want to remind that we will bring in a young ranger from Kruger to also discuss. Then this debate can carry on again, and as there's a need to take the debate forward, we will allow for that debate, and I would listen to the wisdom of other people who advise me and say, let's go this route or that route to take the debate further in whichever way. So just before I'm going to allow Oliver Hutton, just want to double check with Maret. Rod, is there anybody who's been holding on to ask a question and I missed the person?
No, not me.
Not that I can see, but if you want to ask a question, wave your hands in the air. If you can't.
Okay.
I will, Chris, I will set it now that people can unmute themselves.
Okay, so Oliver is going to unmute himself now. Oliver, and you can ask the question as the future. Thank you.
Thank you for letting me ask the last question. I feel very privileged.
You're the most important around here.
My question is that on the side of security and technology, what trends have you seen in the poaching? Like, how do they poach? Do they poach with guns, poison, and so on?
Lovely question, Oliver. Thank you. Now I will also learn. General.
Oliver, the poacher is a destitute person, mostly male, between 18 and 40 years old, with almost nothing. They've come in with the bare necessities. Sometimes they've been to a Sagoma and they believe they're invisible. They're given a firearm and 3 or 4 rounds for which they can pay for their lives if they don't return it, and they spend days in the bush to poach. They are normally from around the parks, and they are recruited and they get paid well in their language, but a fraction of what the poacher bosses and the network gets. There isn't such a thing as technology. They might have a mobile phone, and on the mobile phone in the past, you could check the mobile phone. Now there will be 2 calls because it will be that SIM card only for the pickup again. These are destitute, youngish males from around the parks sent in with a pair of second-hand North Star tackies, rags for clothes, and maybe a few tins of fish and pals, and expected to come back 3 or 4 days later and hand over the Rhino War.
Very, very, very sad. And Samantha, when you also referred to the communities, the reference to the black mambas, it's an incredible incredible mammoth task, and it's sad both ways. It's really sad both ways. And what should be said, General Jooste, I cannot, at the time when I worked in the communities bordering on the park myself, I think at the time we worked on ESCOM statistics, and the number of people who lived in the communities bordering the park, touching the park, ranged between 800 and 1.2 million, 800,000 to 1.2 million people at the time. I'm sure that's much more, but that's the size of the problem that one are looking at. And with unemployment and having nothing, it's just terribly, terribly sad both ways. For the rhino, for the poor people, it's just how it is. Rod Moret is their last question. I think I actually said Oliver is the last person. There's still 66 people. If you want to join our talks, just stay in touch through lca.webinar at lcafrica.org. I thank everybody for your involvement. Everybody around, I think, who's on here tonight are people who care. And because you care, we appreciate and we thank you for caring. Our methodologies, our opinions, our interventions might differ, but as General Jooste said, it's the thin green line, not either or. It is a holistic approach where all of us have to pull our ideas, knowledge, resources together and take this both ways, supporting our communities, saving the rhino for the Olivers who are the future. I thank you all, and thank you, General Jooste.